many speed control options on Andrew's side of the field. So really just going to come down to, I think, leads and how these trainers play, and possibly even that Grimmsnarl and what kind of Grimmsnarl it is relative to this matchup.
Yeah, especially with all the different Grimmsnarls you can kind of see around. But it's time to get into the first match in this best of 3 round 8. Kyogre's Zacian, we're going to get both the restricteds on side, and it's going to go with that Thundurus right away making an appearance. We don't even have to speculate about that, and it's going to be paired up to this Incineroar.
And Kyle free to bring his own Intimidate to this matchup without having to worry about that Defiant ability. You know, I think we're already seeing just the amount of pressure that a Defiant Thundurus brings with it on the field. We're looking, you know, Andrew forced to lead his 2 restricted Pokemon because that was probably his best option to remove this Thundurus from the field as quickly as possible. You know, maybe this Kyogre is trained in such a way that it could take a Wild Charge or a Max Lightning from this Thundurus. You know, most of the Defiant variants are going to be physical, as that is the type of attack boost you get from that ability. So if that's true, then an Origin Pulse plus a Behemoth Blade might be enough damage to pick up the knockout on that earlier, at which point you can start relying on your own Intimidate users. But already Gastrodon going to love to take a possible Max Geyser from this Dynamax on Andrew's side of the field, which means that the Thundurus isn't Dynamaxing this turn, I think.
You know,
yeah, I think.
It is a turn of events, that is for sure. The Gastrodon swap in be so big at this point. The Thundurus instead extra safe, just going to be going for this Protect here. The Behemoth Blade coming out did target into that slot, so Thunder's going to stay extra safe, and it is the Max Hailstorm instead. So it is going to target into this Thundurus slot. At this point, Andrew, of course, looking to try and get that removed as soon as possible. So the Gastrodon swap in, it's only going to be good for, you know, preserving the Incineroar at this point.
It does provide a lot of pressure on the field, and I think that's most likely why Andrew went for the Max Hailstorm over a water type attack from that turn. But that's really good information because a lot of Kyogre nowadays aren't actually running a ice type attack. You know, we are not seeing as many ice beams or blizzards as we used to see from Kyogre in particular. So some great information already out on the field. I think the other key takeaway from this turn is that Thundurus has taken so much damage, it most likely isn't going to Dynamax at this point for the game. And that's just some great knowledge for Andrew to carry with him throughout this turn. It's true that he does have to worry about the Gastrodon now. This Kyogre is most likely going to struggle to find any damage against it with those hailstorms. But, you know, with the Zacian on the field, that's not necessarily the worst thing in the world right now. You probably will have the opportunity to get the 2 Play Roughs or the 2 Sacred Swords or whatever 2 attacks you choose into that Gastrodon for the knockout. And even if the Gastrodon tries to yawn or tries to set up something a little bit sneaky against it, you have your 2 Pokemon in the back to switch in as well. So pretty comfortable, all things considered, for a Gastrodon matchup when you're a Kyogre Zacian player.
That is for sure. The Thunder is just going to be swapping out Incineroar, coming back. A little bit of a pivoting game this time around as Play Rough is going to be revealed on the Zacian, just dealing a nice amount of damage into this Gastrodon. Of course, Worston is still going for the Hailstorm. That is going to be way more than enough damage. That is going to be taking that slug just out of there. And all that pressure that you had with the Gastrodon on the field is lost.
Life Orb on that Kyogre really making the difference there, as Zacian was able to find just enough chip to find that knockout. I don't think that's a guaranteed knockout, so, you know, really important that that Zacian was able to connect Play Rough there. But now that the Gastrodon is gone, is Kyogre a lot more free to go for a Max Geyser, pick up a knockout on that Incineroar. Andrew can also switch out his own Zacian, finally regain some of its attack power that it's lost over these turns. And a great spot to get in his own Intimidate user safely without worrying about the Defiant, which is still in the back of Kyle's party.
Yeah, it's safe there in the back of the party, but already having taken so much damage and then seeing the 2 Pokemon that are on the field for Kyle right now, it's kind of a weird situation in terms of this Dynamax. But first, you got to still get through the Dynamax that is on Andrew's side. A Fake Out, but it's going to be a substitute coming out on the Zacian, start getting set up. And I mean, at this point, you got to start getting set up where you can, especially since the Incineroar is only going to be good around on the field for one turn before just getting KO'd clean out of there.
Yeah, and Kyogre not taking any damage that turn either, which is going to be really important if its move of choice is Water Spout now that Dynamax is over. You know, we know that Kyogre has a water type attack thanks to that Max Geyser, but if it is a Water Spout, Fake Out plus Water Spout easily going to pick up the knockout on that Thundurus. Yes, this Zacian will be able to deal some damage to this Kyogre with Play Rough, but still, I think Andrew just in a really comfortable spot right now. Really, the only thing he has to do here is just make sure he doesn't accidentally drop the stats of this Thundurus prior to it attacking in this next turn, so that Wild Charge won't just flat get that knockout. But, you know, if that's the out, then Kyle has to go for it, as it looks like that Thundurus is going to be the Pokemon to Dynamax, which is a bit unfortunate. You know, I think the Thundurus probably wanted to go for this earlier on, but just couldn't find the opportunity.
Yeah, but, you know, it's not over till it's over. At least, you know, get the Dynamax, you get a little bit of HP. You just got to make it through this next turn, maybe Airstream, get that speed on your side, something to get anything going for you in this match. Zacian behind the substitute, gonna go for a protect, maybe give the opportunity for this Max Airstream to start to enable it to get all this comfortable speed and trying to eliminate this Kyogre, but 3 HP, not gonna be taken out of there. Of course, at this point, Water Spout's off the table, but still Origin Pulses in the rain are gonna hit and say, actually it is gonna be this Water Spout, so we're gonna see just a little sprinkle at this point. 4 HP in rain, and we're just going to be doing more damage to itself.
Yeah, it's unfortunate that the Kyogre got knocked out there, but I will give the opportunity for Andrew to send that Zacian back in or reveal his final Pokemon. Knowing that the Zacian on Kyo's side of the field has the Max Airstream speed boost and has the substitute up, I think it's a little bit risky to bring your own Zacian in, but hypothetically speaking, if your last Pokemon is that Landorus, it's not. You don't have to worry about setting off that Defiant, but you do have to worry a little bit about how you're going to play this turn around. So the nice thing about Rillaboom here is that it will get access to a priority Grassy Glide thanks to that grassy terrain, but I'm curious to see if it's enough to knock out that Thundurus. You know, I think at this point in time, you just let the Incineroar slowly chip away at the Zacian, but you really need to lock in a KO against this Dynamax, and it's just not able to find that.
Not this turn. It is not 10 HP, and that's going to give the Zacian a chance to fire a Sacred Sword back. Incineroar not going to get KO'd either. Still going to be sticking around, but a Max Knuckle from the Thundurus. That is going to be a little bit of a different tale there. That is going to be able to grab this KO as well as get an attack boost for both of the two Pokemon on Kyle's side here. And what was a really weird, iffy situation. Just kidding. There's going to be the recoil back. I'm not even going to finish my sentence. I need to learn how to count HP.
Well, it's still a bit of a weird situation, though, as Kyle's last Pokemon is the Zacian. The substitute is still up. Zacian has a speed boost and Zacian has an attack boost, so it's guaranteed to get a Behemoth Blade against Andrew's Zacian. But there still is this Rillaboom to contend with, and I think depending on what kind of set Andrew has on this Rillaboom, you know, maybe you try and protect the Zacian, as that is the Pokemon that's the biggest threat for Kyle right now, and you try to find a way to break the sub on the opposing Zacian. If it's not going to be Grassy Glide, if you have a high horsepower or something, that's going to be the way to go.
And that's exactly how it's going to go. Or protect the Behemoth Blade right into it. Rillaboom with the Wood Hammer. That is going to be taking the substitute away. So anything that the Zacian over on Kyle's side that had going for it is going to be taken away. And at this point, too, I've seen Zacian do some crazy things, but staring down another full health Zacian and this Rillaboom might be a little bit of a tall ask.
I think there's enough chip damage on Andrew's Zacian for it to go down after a single Behemoth Blade, assuming that it's, you know, one of the more speedier variants, you know, not necessarily max HP or max defenses in terms of how it's been trained. But we're still in a particularly interesting spot as Rillaboom has to connect a Wood Hammer with Alex's Zacian and then a Grassy Glide, and it's just not able to find that damage.
Yeah, I mean, it did have some, you know, stuff going for it, but unable to quite get a KO. And I mean, this Zacian on Andrew's side here is going to be doing a heaps more damage, and that is going to be a victory for Andrew this first round. Though, honestly, with the Thunderous, it kind of did look iffy for a second, but Andrew, that was a strong start, and he's going to finish strong too.
Yeah, and I think the key here is just we have to remember how these Zacian are trained, because that's really good information for both these trainers. Like Andrew's Zacian, clearly on the slower side. You know, it's possible that Kyle didn't necessarily need that speed boost in order to outspeed Andrew's Zacian. Also on the bulkier side, you know, we saw it take that Behemoth Blade quite comfortably, even when that Zacian was at +1 attack. So great information for both these trainers going into game 2. And I think really the key thing to keep in mind for Kyle as we talk about adjustments is the speed and the attack boost just weren't enough. You know, I think the way that he played his Dynamax that game was really cool. You know, normally you see Thunderous with Defiant and you think to yourself, okay, you know, they're going to go for Dynamax, they're going to go for those max airstreams early, and they're going to go on the offensive with this Pokemon. That wasn't the case for Kyle. He used it as a support option for his Zacian, which really was the Pokemon that had the best opportunity to go after Andrew's board position, and it just fell a little bit short. But now in game 2, now that you know that information, I think that Kyle can adapt his strategy a little bit. You know, I think you still bring the Thunderous. I think the risk or the threat of the Defiant is so huge in this matchup that you have to consistently apply that pressure. But if you can find a way to maybe Dynamax it a little bit earlier, you know, get that Zacian that speed a little bit earlier so that Zacian's able to go on the offense prior to the last turn of the game, I think that's the adaptation that you make.
Well, also just looking at the fact that the Gastrodon was brought in for Kyle too. Sure, you bring that to put pressure on the Kyogre, but the thing is the Kyogre has that ice coverage, which it works going against very well. As well as the fact that Andrew bringing that Rillaboom, that's also a way to be checking it. So just feel like on Kyle's side, there was just a little passive in the fact that there was the Incineroar and the Gastrodon, and then once the Gastrodon Incineroar is gone, Thunderous at half health, couldn't really do too much. So maybe an adjustment there heading into this game 2. It's going to be the Thunderous. We didn't want to see an adjustment there to lead. Zacian's on both ends and this Kyogre. And I feel like too, if the Thunderous wanted to apply that pressure, that earlier the better for this Max.
Yeah, this is a much better opportunity for this Thunderous to go for a possible Dynamax if Kyle decides that's what he's looking for here. Not only could you Airstream and immediately, you know, give your own Zacian that speed boost, you can protect it this turn as well, just to be extra safe. I think the combination of the Zacian plus the Kyogre against a Dynamax Thunderous, assuming it's relatively bulky in terms of how it's trained, that's not going to be enough for a knockout. So then you can go for a Max Lightning the next turn after that and just remove the Kyogre as well. Even though it's the same Pokemon so far from Kyle, I think configuring them this way really makes it a lot easier for you to apply pressure. And it also forces Andrew to keep that Incineroar in the back and just not intimidate, which is, I think, also really important. It's possible, depending on what Pokemon that Andrew brought to this game, he can't switch at all because he doesn't want to intimidate, but then you also don't want to switch the Rillaboom into a Max Airstream.
See, that's the check that I love with this Thunderous matchup. And at this point, too, feeling comfortable that Thunderous is going to see the Dynamax right out of the gate, but not the only one. Kyogre also going to be going for the max. Last time we saw that it went for that Hailstorm. Now with no Gastrodon on the other side, it could be a read whether it still goes for that. It could just be the Max guys are knowing, okay, the Gastrodon didn't really do much. But regardless, it is going to be a Max for a Max, an eye for an eye, just all the pressure out at the gate, but not for Kyle. Instead, going for the, wait, nobody is. There's Max cards all around.
Looks like these trainers are feeling each other out a little bit, which means that the Zacian are going to be free to go for those Behemoth Blades. And again, another opportunity for us to observe just how these two Zacian are trained.
I mean, these two trainers, they're on the same wavelength at this point. Both of the Max guards, both of the Behemoth Blades. And it is going to be Andrew's doing a bit more damage at this point, but neither doing quite enough to secure a KO.
Yeah, so good confirmation. I think this sort of settles it that Andrew's Zacian is a bit slower than Kyle's, because we see, you know, Andrew's Zacian still in the yellow, Kyle's Zacian in the red. So important things to keep an eye out for, especially this turn. As I wonder, you know, if you're in Kyle's shoes, knowing that you can attack consistently first, you just go for the knockout on the Kyogre and hope for the best.
Yeah, Behemoth Blade hitting into that spot. Andrew firing the Behemoth Blade back, though, into the opposing Zacian, just wanting to get that off of the field, not worry about it. Damage already been done, and you were already talking about last turn being pretty good confirmation. I feel like this seals the deal.
Yeah.
This is it at this point. A big hit into the Kyogre and enough damage already done. It is going to easily secure this KO, especially being super effective. This Kyogre didn't really get to do too much. It max guarded and then it's going to be KO'd.
Yeah, and that's just, I think, goes to show how much of an offensive lead this was for Kyle and how this Thundurus doesn't necessarily need to be using Airstreams in order to make a difference in this matchup. I really like that Max Lightning play because it forces the Kyogre off the field. It's most likely a Hailstorm would have been able to knock out the Thundurus outright, given how much damage it seemed to do to that Gastrodon earlier. And now that the Rillaboom is forced out again on the field in a situation it probably doesn't want to be in, it's going to have to worry about that Airstream knockout, and it's going to have to worry about this Calyrex Shadow Rider dealing some big damage as well. Kyle just did a very good job of changing up his gameplay style, realizing that you don't necessarily have to bring the Gastrodon to shut down the Kyogre. You can just bring two Pokemon that deal a ton of damage against it and remove it from the field just as easily.
There's two ways to get rid of a Kyogre, and I'm liking this option a lot more. The Calyrex being able to put on so much more pressure, and especially already just being pretty speedy itself too. So you're talking about not going for the Max Lightning out of the gate, instead just dealing some damage. And Andrew feeling a little bit of that pressure, just going to be going for the Protect this turn. Both times around, this is going to at least wait out the last turn of this Dynamax, which is going to be really nice and make sure that this Astral Barrage from Calyrex isn't going to be doing too much extra in the first place. Last turn, it will be an Airstream just to make sure there is the speed on Kyle's side going into this, and just a good amount of damage through Protect on this Rillaboom.
Yeah, also possibly looking for some information about this Calyrex Shadow Rider, you know, trying to see what attack is it going to go for. Is it going to try to do something a little bit sneaky, but just a good old Astral Barrage. And while these Pokemon are still on the field this turn, I think Andrew really has to pick his target here. You know, the Calyrex Shadow Rider could possibly be holding a Focus Sash or something. It's possible that Grassy Glide plus another attack from the Zacian will be required to knock it out. And it's also possible that the Zacian will just be knocked out by an Astral Barrage at this point, at which point Andrew would be down to his last Pokemon. And if that last Pokemon is the Incineroar, then you're forced to activate Defiant, and you're also just not in a good place. To his benefit, the Thundurus's Dynamax is over, which means if he's running Fly for that Airstream, it's going to be that much harder to go for those attacks. It will take 2 turns, and maybe that's how you find an opening. You know, 2 turns, 2 grassy glides, 1 knockout, but it's still going to be really unfortunate as you are forced to activate that Defiant and give the Thundurus an attack boost.
If there's a window, you got to go through that quickly, because now that the Thundurus has the attack boost, things are going to get a little tricky, a little weird. Calyrex going for the Protect is going to be well protected, as that Rillaboom does try to target into that, and now a Wild Charge, a lot of damage into this freshly swapped in Incineroar, and it just kind of seems at this point like Kyle's in the driver's seat.
He is. The Incineroar could flinch the Thundurus this turn, and that would give the Rillaboom an opportunity to connect an attack with it. I don't think Grassy Glide will knock it out at this point. You know, even though it took so much damage from the recoil plus the Life Orb in the previous turn, it's just not going to be enough. And even on top of that, as we get confirmation of Kyle's last Pokemon, there was no Gastrodon brought to this game at all. It's just going to be that Incineroar with the Intimidate. I think it's time for Andrew to start looking forward towards Game 3. You know, he did a fantastic job of just trying to keep that momentum going, but unfortunately Thundurus and Zacian were just insurmountable at the end of the day.
Yeah, I love the fact that the Gastrodon wasn't brought into this matchup. I'm a big fan of Gastrodon, but I do think with how things are panning out, not the greatest. A critical hit just to get a little bit of extra damage, but that's going to be it. Incineroar joining the field for that Calyrex. At this point too, I mean, the amount of damage that Thundurus can do, the fact that it still has that Airstream boost behind it, I mean, it's a tricky situation, and now Kyle has that thing of pressure on his side.
Exactly. Like, Thundurus doesn't even have to go for Fly if Kyle doesn't want it to at this point. You know, fighting type attack into the Incineroar, easily going to pick up that knockout. You could just go for an attack into the Rillaboom if you wanted to, but at this point in time, I think it's better off to go for Flare Blitz as the knockout at that point, because then you're at least not waiting the turn, you know, for Thundurus to go up into the sky and then come back down.
No, which is fair. A wild charge is going to be going into that Incineroar spot, just clean up that KO. Of course, Rillaboom leaves for the Zacian to re-enter the field here, but the Zacian not going to appreciate that much either, as it is going to be a Flare Blitz from this Incineroar. Of course, the Zacian didn't have the most HP and is super effective hit, but regardless, eliminating that altogether, it's only going to be down to the Rillaboom at this point, and if, like you said, if Andrew wasn't thinking about Game 3 now, he definitely has to at this point.
Yeah, it's a tough call to make in terms of adjustments because, you know, we did see Kyle stick with the Thundurus and the Zacian as his lead, and he kept them out on the field. But, you know, if he decides to make an adjustment to his lineup in Game 3 and bring that Gastrodon back, you can't necessarily go for Max Geyser comfortably there. Yeah. And as long as you're in that position where those Pokemon have the speed advantage and you know that a Max Lightning plus a Behemoth Blade is enough to secure the knockout on your Kyogre, even through the Dynamax, that is something you have to be very careful of. Now, you know, when we're talking about big damage and there is a Grimmsnarl available to a person, you have to look at the Grimmsnarl and be like, well, is that the adaptation that you bring? You know, Kyle does have access to Fake Out, but he hasn't been leading it. That means that Grimmsnarl could set up a Light Screen or a Reflect and try and give that Kyogre or that Zacian a bit more time on the field. But that's also a bit of a gamble as well, I think, for Andrew, because if the Grimmsnarl does happen to find its way at the end of a Behemoth Blade or a Flinch plus any other attack, you know, that's going to be an easy knockout for Kyle. So you really have to make a call here. I think that if I were in Andrew's shoes, I would probably feel more comfortable having the Grimmsnarl over the Incineroar, just because then I don't have to worry about Defiant. But Defiant is just one of those things that's so scary. I feel like sometimes the best strategy is just to not bring anything that will accidentally activate Defiant, so then you don't have to worry about, oh shoot, I'm so stressed out. It's Game 3, I accidentally activated Defiant, and now I'm guaranteed to lose.
See, I also just feel sus about this Rillaboom and the fact that there is multiple things over on Kyle's side that can counter it. And of course, you need the Rillaboom to be able to deal with this Gastrodon, but of course, Kyle not bringing that Gastrodon in this Game 2 then puts it in a weird spot, because the last thing you want to be doing is getting walled by this slug. But at the same time, why would he then bring it, considering how Cali Shadow was really nice for that pressure?
Yeah, and it's also interesting too when you think back to Game 1, where Andrew was able to defeat the Gastrodon without the Rillaboom. You know, it was a Max Hailstorm plus a Play Rough, I believe, that secured the knockout at that point. So, you know, that could be another adjustment. Leave the Rillaboom behind to bring the Grimmsnarl instead. I think the nice thing about having Rillaboom in a matchup against Gastrodon and Calyrex Shadow Rider in particular is that you have the priority attacks, and I think that's probably why you still bring that Pokemon. But if you're having trouble finding the opportunity for your other Pokemon to attack, you know, sort of leaving Rillaboom off the table might be the best option.
Yeah, I'm curious about the Grimmsnarl, because we touched on it before, but the fact that Grimmsnarl, there's a couple different ways that it can be ran, a couple different techs, a couple little, you know, trick up its sleeves that it might have. So it's hard to say, too, if that's something that we want to see, because we don't actually really know what's being ran on it yet. It could have the perfect counter.
Yeah.
It could also just be entirely useless in this matchup, and we're like speculating, and we actually don't know what that little trick on it is. We might get to find out, though, because Andrew is going to be leading that Grimmsnarl next to the Kyogre to start things out, going up against this restricted pair of Calyrex Shadow and Zacian.
To the Kyogre's benefit, a Calyrex Shadow Rider is going to be a much friendlier Pokemon to be staring down than the Thundurus with Max Lightning and access to that super effective damage, but still very fast, still very powerful. You know, looking like Andrew's going to have to take an Astral Barrage and a Behemoth Blade on that Kyogre before finding an attack, and there still might be that Gastrodon in the back to worry about as well. I think the nice thing about having the Kyogre in this position is that if you do decide to Dynamax and you decide to play it safe and go for Max Hailstorm again, if it is Focus Sash on that Calyrex Shadow Rider, you bring it down to Sash and then Hail will pick up that knockout. So that's something that works to your advantage. We also don't know anything about this Grimmsnarl, right? Clearly Andrew thinks it's the play here and he thinks it's the matchup. So if this Grimmsnarl has something that could help Kyogre outspeed or otherwise take a few more of these attacks, I mean, that could be all the wiggle room he needs to get the advantage.
Andrew is going to be the only one to go for the Dynamax on this first turn, and no Max Guard, no reason to at this point. We'll actually be able to see the damage come out. Grimmsnarl just looking to set up a little bit. Going to go for that Reflect, make sure the Zacian can't do quite the damage that it would like to do, as it looks to fire back with this Behemoth Blade. Can only assume that it's going into what it will be the super effective hit, and that is going to be a clean KO on top of that because of that critical hit.
Unfortunately for Grimmsnarl, I think that is the one thing it cannot protect itself against, but that Reflect will help this Kyogre stick around a bit longer, and this little bit of damage through the Protect on the Calyrex Shadow Rider will help as well, I think. You know, the threat of a Focus Sash has now been removed, so now maybe you send something in that can go for a priority attack into that slot pretty comfortably and pick up that knockout, maybe even force a Gastrodon onto the field to take a Grassy Glide. If the Rillaboom is here, it would have been a really interesting time to bring it in. Instead, I think the Zacian does still have to worry about the Calyrex Shadow Rider dealing damage, but is hiding behind Reflect. We've already seen that it's slower and bulkier than Kyle's Zacian. Should be able to pick up a knockout on it. You know, after another turn of hail damage, I think that would equal approximately the amount of damage we saw that Zacian survive with in game 2. So
yeah, it was like 23, 25-ish.
Yeah, around there. So good things to keep an eye out for. And again, this Kyogre, because the Shadow Calyrex is so special defensively weak, can just keep going for Hailstorm and not have to worry about a Gastrodon switch in and still get the knockouts that it's looking for.
Yeah, it does hurt a little bit that Andrew does have to play around making sure that there isn't that Gastrodon swapping, because that would be effectively a wasted max turn at this point. I am intrigued about the fourth and final Pokemon too, and the fact that is it the Incineroar, is it the Rillaboom, because that changes a lot of things up. Will it be a Protect though, and Will-O-Wisp to be revealed on this Calyrex? That is going to be nice, but a little bit of a more passive turn means that Kyle can start setting up his own Zacian. Going to be hiding behind that substitute. The Max Geyser, though, feeling confident that, you know, there's not going to be a swap or the Gastrodon was not brought at all, is going to make an appearance, and that is going to clean up the KO on the Calyrex. And that is going to mean that the Zacian on Andrew's side won't get burned.
And that is huge for Andrew. I think that knowing that there was no switch in. I mean, that was such a great prediction on his part, knowing that the Shadow Calyrex would prioritize going for Will-O-Wisp in that situation. A great call. Incineroar also forced out on the field. Still isn't Gastrodon.
Yep.
Could indicate that it is not brought to this game. That being said, you know, getting an Intimidate down on a Zacian is always a good thing. And if you were to try to bait your opponent into going for a water type attack, of course you'd send in the fire type cat that everybody loves to hit with Max Geysers as a result. So Kyle could just be looking for a quick Intimidate and switch, as Incineroar is known to do. But really, I think Andrew is in a fine spot to go for a attack into that slot, possibly even double into it with like a Play Rough or a Behemoth Blade or Sacred Sword, I guess, and a Max Hailstorm. You know, the Incineroar would not appreciate taking both those attacks. You knock it out, or you knock that Gastrodon out if that is the Pokemon left in the back of Kyle's party, and then you sort of take things from there.
Well, no swap. I feel like it might be pretty safe to say that there is not a available swap. It might be the Thundurus that was so effective in the last game, going to be hidden in the back for now, as it will be a fake out onto the Incineroar on Andrew's side, followed up with a Behemoth Blade just to deal that damage. We're really seeing the effects of Reflect here at this point, though, as it's going to be able to survive quite comfortably from that. Andrew gets to fire back. We're talking about the bait of the Max Geyser into the Big Fire Cat. Not a bait at all at this time. That is going to be a clean one-hit KO, and that is going to allow us to see the final Pokemon here on Kyle's side.
And if it is going to be that Thundurus, which it is, and I don't think we've seen Kyle go for Dynamax yet either this game, knowing that your opponent's Dynamax is over and knowing that you have the speed advantage, you have the protection of the substitute, this is a fine way to start making a comeback here. We don't know what Andrew's last Pokemon is either, but if it is that Incineroar, you're going to be activating Defiant, and that's how you start putting on that pressure. If it is the Rillaboom, you're going to struggle to deal any damage with the presence of Max Airstream from that Dynamax Thundurus. So even though it seemed like Kyle was really forced on the back foot, knowing that this Thundurus was the last Pokemon and that he was able to play it in such a way that it wasn't revealed until Kyogre's Dynamax was over and until it could really comfortably threaten the Pokemon on Andrew's side of the field, was just a very strong play from Kyle.
Always love a late game Dynamax as well. There's always something to be said about sending out the Dynamax early, making sure you can apply that pressure, but having it at this stage of the competition where Andrew's already used up all 3 turns, you're just gonna get so much value out of setting up this endgame, even if you are down to your last 2 Pokemon. And it puts, at this point, Andrew in a weird spot too, if it is that Incineroar in the back for that reason we were talking about, that Intimidate and just building this Thundurus' attack up. For now though, don't have to worry. Zacian going to be going for another hit into the opposing one. It is going to be able to secure the KO this time around and bring Andrew down to his final 2 as well. So we can finally get that revealed. No max Airstream, instead an unprotected Kyogre is going to be a fainted Kyogre at this point. And sure, Andrew might have one more Pokemon, but I think it's too late.
Yeah, that is unfortunate. It's possible that he was hoping the presence of the Reflect still on the field would be enough to give Kyogre the opportunity to use that Ice-type attack for some big damage, but Kyogre just having enough chip on it, possibly even from its own Life Orb, to secure that knockout. And it's nice to see the Rillaboom making an appearance once again. You know, I think that if your opponent has a Gastrodon and you're running a Kyogre team, again, it's just one of those Pokemon that you like to lean on a bit heavier and just have, so you, in case your opponent does switch it in, you can immediately sort of take advantage of the easy knockout. But in this situation, just not going to be able to find enough damage here. And as we see Andrew lock in that forfeit, I think that, you know, both these trainers handled that matchup very well. It was just a late game Dynamax really